not been able to find a suitable husband. Frail and old, she lives with distant relatives reliant on their charity and... No, that's not quite right either. You see, it's hard to start a story when you can't get a good idea of who your main leading character actually is. Christina, or someone who went by the name of Christina with her family and friends, wrote down her favourite melodies in a manuscript book during the period between 1836 and 1841. Her surname is Gibb, and yet there are no records of a Christina Gibb with the right birth date to be old enough to be writing and being young enough to, well, not be dead in any register. She writes that she was residing at Eagle House in Enfield in 1841, but the 1841 census does not include her as a resident of the house. She is, despite extensive searches on expensive ancestry websites and trails through Brechin graveyards, wiped from history. So, how should I go forward with a show about someone whom I know, well, nothing? Should I just play some fiddle tunes from a manuscript book, make a digital soundscape or two and call it a day? No. I felt like I owed it more to Christina to give her more than that, despite so much of her life being shrouded in mystery. I know the places where Christina lived. I know who she must have eaten beside, talked to, laughed with. I know what landscapes she saw, and I know what her world would have been like. I know that she swirled the tops of her H's when she was writing down the name of the tune, that she often forgot to sharpen her pen nibs, that if she got distracted, she tended to write down the same bar twice. I know enough to give you all an idea. A what if. After all, that's all a story really ever is. So, what if, once, there was a middle-aged gentlewoman who called herself Miss Christina Gibb. She came from a well-to-do family from near Brechin, who had married into another well-to-do family, the Binnies, and due to being somewhat older and unmarried in the early 19th century, she found herself ferried from family member to family member, house to house, a slightly unwanted but nevertheless accepted guest. One of these places in which she resided from time to time was called Mallston House, a sprawling manor near Brechin with acres of land surrounding it. As a woman of good breeding, she had plenty of free time, and with not much else to do, she had at some point learned how to play the pianoforte. By the time we catch up with her in 1836, she's fairly proficient on the instrument and is taken to writing down her favourite tunes in those little manuscript books she likes to carry around with her. Let's take a moment to imagine what her world might be like. I've got the newspaper, I need the book. Too many props. There we go. No problem. Scots living in those times would have been astounded at the scale and pace of change in the century ahead. In those days, Scotland was far from being a land of dark satanic mills. It was more a halfway house between the old and the new world. Scots in the countryside lived a narrow and insular lifestyle, but one that was of a tolerable standard. The insularity of rural life was reinforced by the primitiveness of the means of transport and of communications. In other words, Christina's Brechin in 1836 had no cars, no trains, no telephones, no radio, no television, no electricity, no central heating, no regular post service. Travelling from Dundee to Forfar by horse took 3.5 hours. Dundee to Glasgow by horse took, what do you think? 20 hours. Travelling from Brechin to London would require a horse-drawn carriage, a steamboat, and then either a hackney carriage adverts for fairs, shipping forecasts, and unkind jokes about Quakers, anxious articles talk about immigration to the Americas, slavery, appearances happening in the Highlands, the dangers of war, possibly imminent war, complaints about obligatory royalist celebrations that are using up money that Brechin does not have, and above all, the dreaded corn taxes. Back to my hat. This is a time of very great suffering and want through our country. Why have we not a government in sympathy with our wishes? England has done it all. I trust Scotland and Ireland will continue to point the finger, not of scorn, but of stern reproof to their sister England, until the blush of honest shame shall cover her, and England shall repent and amend. The Tory ministry have been but a short time in power in this spell, and yet they have continued to commit one or two blunders in their foreign diplomacy. The Tories are doomed to maintain their character of clever diplomatists in scheming the ruin of their country and the promotion of its rivals. Wonder what that's like. But enough about politics. Let's go back to Molesden, where the luxuries of high-class living are softening Christina's life from the worst of these economic blows. It is winter, and an icy one at that. Christina is sitting at her desk, next to the fire. Christina Gibb is writing in her manuscript book, persevering despite the sputtering pen and the ink blotch that has just splashed itself all over the corner of the page. She is sitting at her desk, carefully copying the sheet music she borrowed from a friend. It is tedious work, but she's looking forward to having this homemade version all to herself. Wrists beginning to ache, she puts down her pen and circles her hand a few times to ease off her cold, cramped muscles. It doesn't matter how many fires the maids light or how many layers one put on in the morning, these large country houses are just never entirely warm. Christina rises, straightens a little stiffly, and wanders to the window. She gazes out at the frost-tipped fields and tall trees surrounding the sprawling grandeur of Molesden, the peaceful silence broken only by the crackle of the logs in the fireplace. Christina shivers, and after admiring the rural view, she turns and rings for the maid. A pot of tea will warm her fingers sufficiently to finish copying the piece before the light begins to fade. lay frost-tipped fields, stretching out in every direction, and at the edge of those fields grew a thick, dark forest, the tall trees stretching out into the clear winter sky. The bizarre, surreal juxtaposition of those silent fields, the view so similar to the one Gib would have known, and the grumbling traffic that growled along the road behind me, created a sense of standing at the brink of two worlds, 1 foot in the now, 1 foot in the past. As I stepped up the sturdy estate wall, feet sinking into the deep piles of crisp winter leaves, it felt almost as though the traffic din faded just a little, became just a little fainter, and if I kept on leaning further and further, I might simply tumble forward into the time I was trying to imagine. The fields were empty, save for a few sheep and, inexplicably, a rusted old bus. And I had a moment where I considered trying to sneak past the overly cautious lodge owners to find the Moleston ruin. Christina Gibbs staying with at Moleston when she was there in 1836, surrounded by those endless fields. Members of both the Binney family and the Gibb family and a whole army of servants and landowners were all residing at Moleston, but with such a sprawling mansion, I'm sure space wouldn't have been too much of an issue. The Binneys were rich, Thomas Binney enjoying significant wealth that almost definitely came in part from the slave trade. Anne Binney, his daughter, had married a high-ranking army officer, Colin Gibb. Colin, mysteriously buried with the barest of headstones in an Edinburgh cemetery, far away from his relatives in their quiet Brechin graveyard, was probably Christina's older brother. Anne was hardly a quiet, docile wife. Indeed, whilst her husband was away at war in India, she bought jewels worth £1 million in today's money under his name without his knowledge. It took the jewellery shop to threaten an expose in the Edinburgh and London newspapers for the matter to be settled. The figure of Anne began to arise out of my imagination, melodramatic and a little scheming. And I couldn't help wonder how the trio of Thomas, Anne, and Christina might have interacted with one another. Christina and Anne stand in a chilly, muddy field near Moleston, Thomas tying the horses to a nearby post. This venture had been Thomas's idea, the man promising the two women that he had something very exciting to share. Anne is looking cold and bad-tempered. She did not want to come on this trip and is therefore determined to make everyone else as miserable as she. Why, it's only a moldy rock, she exclaims haughtily as she surveys the reason for their trip. Thomas finishes tying up the 3 horses and leads the woman towards, Christina thought surlily, what does indeed just look like an old stone. What is the curious nature of the stone? She asks, trying to sound more polite than Anne. He rubs off some of the wet leaves and grass and beckons for her to step closer. See, there are remarkable etchings carved onto the face of it. Sure enough, Christina could now make out the swirls, animals, and symbols covering the small pillar, mystic images that filled her with a sense of deep unease. I believe them to be most ancient in nature, Thomas continues excitedly. Christina is set with a feeling of dread as she continues to stare at some of the strange markings. We should leave it be, Thomas, she says, with a voice full of nerves as she backs away. There are many tales of witchcraft in this area. The last trials were over 2 centuries since, and it is said that the women all cursed Brechin were burned at the stake. This old stone may have been used in one of their satanic rituals. Anne scoffs. Come, that is a mere story, told to frighten children on a winter's eve. Christina merely shakes her head, causing Thomas and Anne to exchange a look of pitying amusement. I apologise for giving you distress, Christina, Thomas says. It was quite the opposite of my intention. Come, let us go back to Moleston and warm ourselves with some hot cocoa and forget this matter. Christina lets herself be led away from the stone and back towards her horse. She is not sure if her shivering is only from the icy wind. As much as she tries, she can't shake the uneasy feeling they are being watched. Christina Gibb, if she was indeed as superstitious a person as I've imagined her to be, wasn't wrong in her fears about the practice of witchcraft in the area of Brechin. During the 17th century, the horrific countrywide witch trials left their bloody mark on the town. Local names such as Witchden Road and Witch Pool are a leftover trace of the toxic period, full of persecution, torture, and judicial murder. Janet Cooper was imprisoned in Brechin jail. When she was there, an unexplained fire broke out in her cell, which had neither hearth nor candle. In her confession, Janet claimed that she had known the devil for around 4 years. Catherine knew that a confession meant her death, and she vowed to her friends that she would never give one. She swore that, if she was executed, some people in Brechin would suffer greatly 2 days later. She remarked, reasonably, that some townsfolk were like swine and should be locked up in prison with her. Several witnesses swore that her prayers brought an infection to the town. In a strange coincidence, Enfield, the borough in which Christina's Eagle House stood, was also an area well known for witchcraft activity. Indeed, by the 17th century, Edmonton, an area in the south of the borough, was so synonymous with the threat of witchcraft that 2 highly popular plays were written about the area: 1600's The Merry Devil of Edmonton and 1621's The Merry Witch of Edmonton. There, too, local names for the area still hold traces of history now long gone. The common is known as Hagfield, on account of a witch who infested it on stormy nights with her broomstick and her black cat. 2 centuries on from the bloody 1600s, women were less likely to be burned at the stake, but they were still second-class citizens, unable to vote or open a bank account. There were no laws protecting women from domestic abuse until 1853. Married women weren't allowed to keep their own earnings until 1869. Christina's days would have been filled with small talk, pleasant, feminine hobbies, and an occasional trip out to a concert or a ball. Vastly preferable to the grim, gritty reality of working-class women of the era, but not a truly free existence. Upper-class women lived a life not unlike that of a pet caged bird. Never wanting, as so many were in the 19th century, but trapped. Christina Gibb probably lived at far more addresses than just at Mallston House and Eagle House. Gibb, as you may well know, is a name local to the Brechin area, so the chances are that she mostly resided at several estates and grand country houses around that part of Scotland. And yet, thanks to her scribbled notes in the margins of her manuscript book, we know that she did travel down south to at least one destination, Enfield. It was a rare stroke of luck for me how well documented her destination, Eagle House, turned out to be, particularly around the time that Christina was visiting, due in part to its rather infamous occupant, John Fuller Russell. But we'll come to him later. For now, let us drop in on Christina, as she prepares to leave Mallsden after a long and occasionally trying visit and heads for England. Suitcases packed, Christina stands at the imposing entrance of Mallsden House. It has been a pleasant stay, but she was glad to get away from Aunt Vinnie's petty squabbles, Thomas's angry chastising, and Colin's brusqueness. Not that she'd be getting much of a rest from strong personalities down in Middlesex, she thinks ruefully. She comforts herself that with the thought of such close proximity to London, she can at least escape regularly to the city to enjoy the latest fashions and a concert or two. Certainly a more interesting prospect than a day out in Brechin, which, thanks to the Temperance Society establishing themselves in the heart of the town a few years previously, and of course the cholera outbreaks, was a subdued place at the best of times. The horse-drawn carriage trundles into view as the servants bring out the last of Christina's things. She surveys the coach with gloomy resignation as the footman hops out and opens the door for her. This is undoubtedly going to be a bumpy, cold, and highly uncomfortable journey.
Street and Forest Street, and I think it's fairly safe to say that the Enfield that Christina gave you has long gone. Somewhere along here there's a Red Cross shop, or so Google tells me, and if that's still here, that's where Eagle House used to be.
Where were the village streets and the old photographs I gazed at online? The cottages, the grand manors, the trades, the hedgerows. I hadn't expected to walk out into a countryside utopia, but I hadn't quite expected this. I wandered along the side of the motorway, hacking at the car fumes, squinting at my phone's Google Maps in the blazing sun. A left, another left, along 4th Street for 5 minutes, and then there, in this decidedly dodgy part of town, next to a corner shop selling mangoes, papayas, and cheap phone calls to Ghana, sat the Red Cross shop. White paint smeared with dirt, dresses in the window, rusting TV aerial on the roof. This was it, then. This was where the ghostly remains of Eagle House stood. Think what Christina would think to see the beautiful, ornate wonders of Eagle House now flattened to make way for a Red Cross shop and council estate buildings. The bubbling brook nearby now full of litter, efficiently funneled by concrete walls and an iron grill, the bridge long gone. And yet, Enfield in Christina's time was hardly a ye olde England paradise. The old photographs I looked through at Enfield archives may have shown hedges, horse-drawn carts, and wholesome-looking lads in aprons carrying freshly baked breads, but 1840s Edmonton was a rough place in which to live. Originally a quiet village separate from London, the newly built factories in Ponders End had made the place a dingy, grimy factory town. Poor and ill thought of by the rest of the country. In 1931, the elderly vicar Leonard Bolden wrote a memoir about Enfield of the previous century, calling it a neglected pagan place, a stronghold of evil. He talks about how the poorer people lived crowded together east of 4th Street in slum cottages near the four factories. Only the west side of 4th Street was considered high class. The public houses near the church were open from 6:30 a.m. and another minister from the latter part of the 1800s wrote in his memoirs about how, as one went over the road to Matins at 8 a.m, one saw the women going into the alehouses to fill up their bottles of beer. So why were the inside walls of Eagle House, one of the few grand houses in this poor area, decorated so lavishly with 14th century art? The answer lies in who else was living in the house in the 1840s alongside our Christina Gibb. The 1841 census, the first one of its kind in the UK, lists the residents of Eagle House as Thomas Fuller Russell, vicar and academic, his wife, Elizabeth Fuller Russell, his son, John Fuller Russell, and 2 servants. Christina, however, is, of course, absent from the 1841 census for the building, as the census was taken in June and she visited Eagle House in the winter months. Thomas Fuller Russell may have studied for a master's somewhere in Scotland in his youth, and it is this possible Scottish connection that holds the most promise as to how he and Christina, likely his contemporary in age, knew each other, and how she ends up staying in this seemingly random building so far from Brechin. It is not Thomas, however, who is the best known member of this little family unit. His son, John Fuller Russell, is mentioned in several art history books as one of the most fervent collectors of 14th century Italian art in 19th century England. He was also an author, whose writings about knightly chivalry, Boswell's travel in Scotland, and drier fare about church politics proving fairly popular during his lifetime. He was also a strong supporter of the Oxford movement. The Oxford movement was a rebellious group within the Church of England. They argued for changes in service practices, church decorations, and holy day celebrations, changes that the vast majority of the church thought suspiciously pro-Catholic. This was one of the hot scandals of the time, getting TV reality star worthy coverage in newspapers across England. And Thomas Fuller Russell, a man who had already changed his last name to escape scandal in his own youth, was presumably far from thrilled to have his hotshot son drag the Fuller Russell name through the mud. Thomas wasn't even a supporter of the Oxford movement, so dinner-time conversation must have been fraught at best. In the words of 20th century local historian and vicar, Leonard Bolden, I imagine that John Fuller Russell was one of those good men who had the art of making enemies. He was a pioneer, and pioneers must always expect opposition. I picture him as a somewhat stern and forbidding personality, a very stiff Praxarian. Of course, there was one place where John Fuller Russell, a man accused of often writing at unconscionable length, that's a quote from an editor of a paper he kept writing to, and a vicar brutally beleaguered by endless scandals where he was accused of bribery, pocketing church funds, forcibly making street urchins become altar boys, and most shocking of all to the COB, seemingly attempting to make his church into a stronghold of Catholicism, could pour out his opinions on the world without danger of rebuke or argument into his own private notebooks. The Enfield Archives holds a small notebook owned by John Fuller Russell, the aged pages held together by a string, probably found by a quick-thinking archivist sometime in the previous century. The writings start off as sermon ideas, Bible verses and notes on Hebrew scriptures, but quickly the book turns into a far more practical exit. Somewhere to store his scribblings and lists about his St. James's parishioners. St. James's Church was a run-down, ramshackle building, the church fund so low that at one point the gas company turned off the gas and people had to bring their own candles to worship. John had his work cut out to make respectable parishioners out of the alcoholic, disease-ridden factory workers that lived just round the corner from Eagle House's lavish front door, and received endless stern letters from his bosses telling him off for not doing enough in his efforts to bring Christian salvation to the area and turn the factory workers into law-abiding citizens of modern England. Never one to shy from the challenge, John marched into the dirty streets and tried to make sense of the poverty-stricken chaos around him. slovenly, ignorant, brutish, drunk, and heretical. Poor Christina. Moleston had its share of strong personalities and scandal, but nothing compared to John Fuller Russell's high-intensity lifestyle, his rantings and his crusades. But even if the company at Eagle House did not prove particularly enjoyable, Christina was better positioned in Enfield to escape to the bright lights of London. Grand balls, shopping trips, interesting food, concerts. London must have been quite the excitement. It's entirely probable that some of the tunes so carefully copied down into Christina's manuscript book were requested after she heard the performer live in London. Not, alas, that she necessarily had the best of taste when it came to music. One of Christina's favourite performers seems to be a woman called Miss Lightfoot. She has not retained her fame here in the 21st century, but little comments about her can be found here and there if you know where to look. Her performances of Beethoven and other more traditional fare earned her rave reviews about her consummate skill and good talent, but unfortunately her own compositions, such as Fisherman's Song, so lovingly copied into Christina's manuscript book, did not fare as well in reviews, such as this one from the August 22nd, 1835 edition of the Court Journal, Gazette of the Fashionable World. Christina is sitting at the pianoforte, trying to chafe some warmth back into her fingers. The cold might not be as brutal here as it was in the north, but she is still wishing for summer as she smooths out the manuscript and prepares to try out the newly copied melody she's just finished writing out. The marvellous concert performed by Miss Lightfoot just the other day is fresh in her mind, and she's eager to bring that happy moment back to life in her own small way by learning one of Miss Lightfoot's songs herself. Clearing her throat, she settles herself, smooths her skirts, and then the sound of the door knocker cuts through her concentration. And then the sound of the door knocker cuts through her concentration. The maid bustles down the hall to open the door, and the grunts and banging sounds of two workmen bringing something into the foyer drifts into the parlour. Of course, John's new Italian painting. How could she forget that today was the delivery day when he had talked of so little else for the past several weeks? It is a very fine painting, Christina is sure, as John has excellent taste when it comes to these matters. But why must those men make such a dreadful noise bringing it up the staircase when she wanted to practice her new song? Surely John had enough paintings by now. The house is full of them, and Christina secretly considers them all to look rather drearily similar to one another. "Thomas," she calls, rising with resignation from the pianoforte. "Come, let us see what fine art your son has bought this time. I trust the men currently carrying it up the stairs will find space for it, somewhere or other." The story behind Christina Gibbs' little manuscript book is the story of two worlds: the quiet countryside of Brechin and the semi-urban surroundings of Enfield. It's also the story of two worlds of a different sort: the world that Christina knew and the world outside the walls of her comfortable, gilded cage. The worries of corn laws, starvation and terrible factory accidents may have faded into the past here in the 21st century, but that doesn't mean that we live in an equal society. Over the last year, my mind has often returned to that grimy Red Cross shop on 4th Street where Eagle House once stood. The area is still working class 2 centuries later. The mix of ethnic communities clear from the adverts for Polish and Turkish foodstuffs, services to send money to the Philippines, SIM cards for Uganda and Nigeria, Muslim clothes shops and African draperies. If you find yourself at that Red Cross shop, I suggest that you turn right. Walk along 4th Street for around 10 minutes, 8 minutes if you're a quick walker. Turn left onto Park Lane, a street leading towards Pym's Park, the wooded grasslands that were once the grounds of Pym's house, owned by the Ray family in Christina's time. Turn that corner and suddenly the traffic noise eases. The hedges return. You can even hear birdsong. Electronically locked gates line this street. Keypads and iron bars guarding glassy modern builds. We may be in 2020, but the elite of London still finds ways to separate itself from the dirt and the pollution. Living on the wrong side of the street is now more death than 1,000 cuts, or accurately 1,000 car exhaust fumes, and death by factory work or tuberculosis, but the disparity remains. Samuel Johnson famously once said that when a man is tired of London, he is tired of life. I think we all know the side of the street on which he lived. This project has been a masterclass in unexpected challenges, red herrings, and surprising complications. The figure of Christina herself is still shrouded in mysteries that ultimately proved impossible to solve 2 centuries later, even for someone who is an archivist and a folk historian for parents. Back in January 2019, I came to the Whiteley Centre to have a look at the manuscript in real life. As I looked at this little book, a relic from an age now seemingly vanished, I wondered how I was going to breathe life back into the story of Christina, of a lifestyle and a life experience so vastly different from my own. In that funny way that the universe sometimes has, I received my answer that very evening. Going to a folk section at a friend's house, I sat down next to fellow fiddler and then stared as she took out a plastic folder filled with her favourite tunes. The pages carefully printed, slid into poly pockets, and clipped into the binder with meticulous accuracy. The fiddler propped up the folder on a music stand and pointed apologetically to a handwritten page. I couldn't find the sheet music for that one, so I just wrote it out, she explained, unaware of why I was gazing so intently at a collection of folk melodies. Here was my 2019 equivalent of Christina's notebook. Here was my proof that her world wasn't so impossibly alien as I had feared just that morning. Moleston House is gone. Just rubble remains. A few iron railings and foundation stones now overgrown as nature slowly takes back the land it was once denied. Eagle House has been replaced. First by a garden, then a cinema, then when that was destroyed during the Blitz, council housing. London doing what London does best, recycling what's already there. The newest wave of immigrants to that city of perpetual newcomers, always adapting, always knocking things down, always building things back up. 2 buildings, long since vanished, linked only due to their significance to one woman, situated so far apart from each other for a traveller in the mid-19th century. And yet, the land on which they stood still remains. The ground seat in memories and secrets despite it being pastured for sheep breeding or covered in tarmac. This land is full of echoes and flickers if you stop for long enough to feel them. Less than a ghost, but more than simply a feeling. You see, after gravestones moulder and the last brick crumbles, the land itself still remembers. Our hills, valleys and fields are full of shadows, grooves and indents, the ghost landmarks of what once stood there no matter how many centuries ago. Even in crowded places, city places, these ghost landmarks can be found if you know where to look. A gap in a row of houses where another house once stood, a station title that no longer makes any sense. Church Street, Castle Road, Marketplace, pragmatic street names now long outliving the identifiers that made them useful in the first place. When this digital age fails us, it's sometimes not a bad idea to look up from the computer screen and see what you can find out with your own eyes.